everyone. I wanted to give you some feedback on the midterm exam. In general, you did really well. I went through and did an analysis of the questions. It was worth a possible 240 points. The average score was 219. The median was 220, a little higher. And in general, let's see if I can pull this screen over a little bit. You saw that there were 28 people that got an A, 15 that got a B, and 2 that got a C. So really, you guys did a very good job on the test. I did want to take a look and see if there were any patterns in the questions that you missed, so that I either knew that I had a bad question and I had to fix it, or that there were concepts that we need to go back and take a look at. And how I do that, in case again you guys are interested, is I can actually go in and look at each of the questions that we did for this test and look to see in general how people scored on them. So some questions, for example this one here, 97% of you got that question right. So I know that generally maybe the question's a little bit too easy, but it's definitely a question where you know the answer to it, so I can assume that the question is a valid question and that we covered the topic appropriately. But I did go through and see a few questions where it looked like you guys struggled a little bit, and I want to touch on those. Those questions would be ones where I saw that you got somewhere between an 87, I want to go back and look at that one, a 77, a 75, and an 80. So we're going to go take a look at some of these individual questions, and I thought you might be interested in how I do it. Let's first take a look. I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint that I'm dealing with as well, but I'm loaded onto the feedback module, and I'll put a link to it, a PowerPoint where I touch on each of the questions that you guys had trouble with. And you can play the PowerPoint and play the associated text with that, or you can just watch this video. So one of the questions, going back, that folks were still missing is the question related to regulatory documentation. So we touched on this in Module 3 as well. There are basically two types of documents that come out of regulatory agencies: regulations and guidance. And you need to know the difference between these two. Regulatory documents are required compliance by law. They're legal documents. You have to comply with them. Guidance documents are simply suggestions or recommendations for the best way to do or implement a particular process. So for this true-false, our regulatory agencies that issue regulations and guidance documents, are you required by law to comply with all aspects of the guidance document? And that answer to that is false. You're not required to comply with guidance. You are required to comply with regulations. So I want to go back and cover again some of the major standards that we see in our industry so that you understand the difference between what's required and what is recommended. So groups like the Society for Clinical Data Management and the societies for clinical research publish standards that they have found to be the best practice in the industry. You're not required by law to follow these, but they will tell you how the industry in general thinks we should work. Again, it's a difference between a best practice and a law. For the regulatory agencies, FDA, the European Medicines Association, and the ICH group, when they issue a regulation or a guidance document, it is something you are required by law to abide with. If it is a guidance document, it's a best practice, it's a recommendation, you are not required to comply with that. So regulation, required; guidance, not required. Let's go back and take a look at the next question that you guys struggled with a little bit. Back to the item analysis. Okay, so another one where a lot of people struggled was the question on data entry. So here I simply asked what of the following are valid types of data entry, and you had to check all that applied. And you could see in general most people were getting these right. Where people ran into problems was this question right here. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. Let's go down to data entry. Okay, so essentially with data entry, there are various types of data entry that are acceptable in the industry. Double data entry is where two people enter the same data and then you compare it. Single passive data entry is where one person enters the data and nobody does a second entry of it for comparator. Visual verification of text or comment field. This is when a second data entry operator looks at comment or verbatim text that was entered, and instead of trying to re-enter it and match all the keystrokes, they just look at it and say, you know what, it essentially says the same thing. I agree. Then you have things like optical character recognition. That's a valid type of data entry that is run through a machine and the machine extracts the values. Also, we're seeing a lot of device and tablet driven entry now, as well as telephone entry of data, voice recognition systems. So all of these are valid. Here's what's not valid and what I want you to know. The FDA Code of Federal Regulations 21 Part 11 requires that you have appropriate controls in place to both restrict access to any sort of electronic system, data system, and also to be able to clearly identify who made an entry or a change. So based on that, we set up user accounts to databases, and that user account has to be linked to a single person, so that you can say anything done by that account essentially is almost like an electronic signature, and you know that it was done by the person who had access to the account. So what is not a valid data entry item is allowing more than one individual to enter data using a single user account. All the rest of these are valid types of data entry. And I talked about these in the lectures, but also this was part of the Proshka text reading. You've got to make sure you're reading the textbook because I deliberately choose some of the questions from the textbook. Let's go back and look at another question. Sorry I have to move around a little bit here, but I want you to see the flow. Okay, another question that I saw people missing a little bit is about capturing the same data twice. And I think here's part of the confusion on that. So in Module 5, when we were talking about good principles of CRF design and database design, one of the things that I talked about quite a bit is that you don't capture the same or similar data twice. Because if you do, all you are doing is providing more opportunities for there to be an error between the two. So design your CRF so you capture the data at one point, and then you can have the monitor source document verify it to make sure that it is accurate, but don't go capturing the same data in two different places because you're going to build an opportunity for discrepancy. And I actually I wanted you to experience that firsthand. So in the Module 5 assignment, I had you enter both the date of birth and the age, and I deliberately put some errors in there because I wanted you to see how that occurs and why you don't want to do it. The question on the test was, does capturing the same data twice ensure you have the correct data? No, that is false. It actually creates more possibility that you will have an error. Okay, so go back and kind of take a look at duplication of data. And this is the lecture module where I talked about the fact that you collect unique data once and only once, and also try to avoid manual calculation. Okay, let's go back and look at another question that got missed a lot. Okay, question. Key variables. Okay, only about 87% of people miss this. Most of you got it right, but really none of you should get it wrong, because we've talked about this at various points, both in the lecture and in the readings, and I actually had this as a question on the Module 3 assignment, and I gave guidance and feedback on it then. So I want to make sure that you understand this. Key variables. Key variables, the question was, which documents contain information on key or critical variables for evaluating efficacy? It could be safety too, but just key or critical variables. Check all that apply. So the Q9 guidance on quality risk management, I mean, that was supposed to be a giveaway. That's that document doesn't talk at all about key variables. It's about the process of managing risk. So that's definitely wrong. A couple of you put it as an answer. Don't put it as an answer. It's wrong. However, in both the protocol and the protocol synopsis and the analysis plan, all of these documents will identify the primary and secondary objectives for the study, and those are where you derive your key variables from. Because if it is a primary endpoint, then you're going to have to consider everything that relates to it as a key or critical variable. And again, you're going to find that in the protocol. You'll find it in the protocol synopsis, and you'll find it in the analysis plan. And I just want to go back and point out again that we've talked about this in a couple of different places. Go back, look at the lectures, check your notes. Key variables, they're almost always going to be in the protocol somewhere, or the protocol synopsis. They're basically your primary and secondary outcome measures, but it's also going to be demography, safety, efficacy, your study termination or completion data, dosing data, and you can find them in the analysis plan, the protocol, and the protocol synopsis. Okay, so key variables, if you see this question again, they can be found in all three of these. And let's see what else. There was another one that we wanted to take. I wanted to go over with you. Oh no! Sorry about that little interruption there. My session timed out. Okay, another question that I don't want to see you guys miss anymore, because this is another key point, and we've seen it both on Module 3 and on this midterm, and you're going to see it on your final, is when do we typically begin to record medical events and conditions as adverse events rather than as medical history? So the correct answer was after the study drug is dispensed. Now, sometimes there are a few sponsors that are very conservative, and they're going to want to say from the time the patient signs the informed consent, then it becomes an adverse event. But for most sponsors, and again, I said typically here, for most sponsors, what you're looking at is the possibility that the event is related to dosing. So anything that occurs before dosing is typically going to be recorded as a medical history of prior conditions. Anything after or upon dosing becomes an adverse event. And this is, again, another really key thing for you to understand, because when you're developing your monitoring plan and your data management plan, and when you're designing your database, you need to say when something is an adverse event and when it should be recorded as a medical history. So keep in mind that the sponsor and sometimes the regulatory agencies, if this is a high-risk a product or a high-risk indication, they'll give guidance to the sponsor on a per-protocol level. So it's per protocol, but in general, or typically, the industry standard is that if something occurs prior to the study drug being dispensed or administered, it's either a medical history or a prior disease or condition, depending on the event. But after, or even the day of study drug, then it is an adverse event. And remember that we've got this great article by Annette Kinsella that I want you to read, and it talks you through the rationale behind focusing on dosing as the trigger for deciding whether or not something's an adverse event. Okay, so please review that. I want you to get it right next time. And I think we've got one more that people struggled with a little bit. Oh yeah, this one surprised me, and if anybody missed it, if they want to give me feedback on why it wasn't clear, I would appreciate that. So let's see, gotta find that. Okay, so database design. The question was, testing of the database is also known as user acceptance testing, end-user testing, user acceptance, and beta testing. And the correct answer was true, but a few of you did have it as false. And so I wanted to make sure that you are aware that, let's see, for validation, verification, and user testing, we talked about the fact that validation is, did we build the right thing? And that valid verification is, did we build that thing correctly or right? And then also that you have to do testing of the database, and that is user acceptance testing, or UAT. It can be called end user testing. It can be called beta testing. All of these are terms that are used to say the end user is testing the database before it is put into production. So all those terms are accurate. Keep that one in mind. And there were a few other things that I wanted to go over. Not a lot of people miss these, but I thought they were interesting. Let's see, I think I got all those. I thought they were interesting, so I wanted to touch on them very briefly. We talked about adverse events, and we've talked about not creating or collecting duplicate data. We talked about double data entry. Again, we talked about avoid duplication and avoid manual calculations. This is the end user question. We've talked about key variables. Oh, assumptions. A couple of you missed the assumptions question, and I just wanted to make sure, you know, these are the typical assumptions that you are drive a estimate, and then that estimate drives the number of people that you might need to have on the trial. But in general, the number of people you're putting on in the study to work on it, not the subjects, but the number of people assigned to work on the study is not part of your assumptions, okay? So it's going to be these items here. And in fact, I've got another set of examples. Okay, so you guys really, in general, you did a great job on the test. I was very impressed. I am going to make a recording of this video, so I'm going to try to slide this over a little bit so you can see it. And when I get the recording up, I'm going to put it here under the feedback section, so you can go in and play this video. I'll put a link to it. And I will also, I've also got a PowerPoint that I've already got up there, that if you want to listen to the PowerPoint and play the individual recording on those slides, you can do that as well. If you have any questions, let me know. One or two of you sent me emails about specific questions, and I will go back and address those. But overall, you guys did a great job. If you just read the review material and make sure that you're caught up, you're going to do good on the final exam as well. Have a great weekend.